Hi all, this is Football Geeks podcast. Tonight's guest is editor and founder of the Shamrock, a Celtic retrospective fanzine dedicated to exploring the people, events, successes, disappointments, politics and humour that have marked the club's incredible history, bringing the past alive and preserving and progressing the great heritage of Celtic Football Club into the modern era. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the show, Paul McQuade. Good evening, Paul.
Thank you, Phil.
How are you, mate? You okay?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. Going through a bit of a heat wave in Scotland at the moment. So,
Tell me about it, mate. I'm absolutely melting in here at the moment.
Yeah.
And normally I'd have a fan on in this room, but because podcasting sort of forbids that, no fan. So hopefully the viewers who are watching on YouTube can't see the beads of sweat that are currently rolling down my forehead. And if they can, I can only apologise. Sorry about that. Probably best to listen on Spotify so you don't get that horrible residue.
Right.
So Paul, we'll dive. We won't dive into, because we're going to talk about your greatest 11 Celtic team of all time in a short while. And there's some great surprises in there, some great players, but also some incredible omissions as well that haven't quite made the cut. But we'll talk about that in more depth in a few moments. So Paul, you've been a Celtic fan all your life. What was it that ignited this lifelong affair with Celtic Football Club?
From a very early age. My dad's a Celtic fan. He's not a massive Celtic fan. We moved from the west of Scotland over to Fife in the East Coast when I was 6. So I think in the early days, a lot of it was just, me kind of clinging to where I'd come from originally, my family back. That kind of feeling, And then, I remember from my 11th birthday, that was the present. My dad took me to Celtic Park, my brother as well. And then after that, he would bring us through for European games at Celtic Park as well. So it really just kind of developed on from there. And I would always spend my summers back through in the West, usually at my great aunt's, and she gave me all of her son's old Celtic books, and I took them back, read them year after year, got really into the history, partly because of that, And then after school, just before I finished school, the fanzines had started, got into that. Then I went to uni, joined the supporters club at Edinburgh Uni, met some of my greatest pals there. So all of that just kept building and building, going to more and more games. And then when late 20s, I decided to move to Glasgow. And I've lived here over 20 years now. My kids are born in Glasgow, and it's just become a way of life.
Oh, it's fantastic, mate. Fantastic. I've been to a handful of Celtic games myself. My first one was 1989-90 season. It was against St Mirren at home, and it was in the bad old days, like when things weren't going particularly great at all. But the one abiding memory that was really fun was the ever more creative ways of smuggling alcohol into the football ground during the horrible booze ban of the old days. And a couple of lads had got a big bag of oranges, and they'd injected everyone with vodka. So you had a kind of munchable vodka and orange drink. I thought it was absolutely magnificent. What a fabulous idea! Yeah. So that was my first encounter of going to a Celtic match in Scotland. My dad lived in Scotland for many years, so I went to several games. He initially was a Hibs fan, and he was big friends of Eric Shadler. And he used to drink in Shades Bar in Easter Road for a few times. So, and he lived there for a good few. He was a Brummie like me, but he lived there for like over 42 years until.
Wow.
Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, he was. I've got Scottish brothers who live up there as well. So it's.
Wow.
Yeah, so I get to see quite a few games north of the border, mate.
Well, that's good. Good to hear. Unfortunately, the drinks ban's still in place.
Yeah. I went a few years ago, and I went to the little bar outside that sells heavy. Went in there, and it's like a little social club, isn't it? That's just
Oh
outside
yeah, yeah.
the
Oh,
ground, and everyone's wrecked. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, the game this season, where we played Rangers at home on a Wednesday night, there was no Rangers fans in at that game. Uh, I've never seen so many drunk people in one place, because they'd also be drinking, taking the day off, and people were just falling about on your way to the stadium. People were just falling about on the street. Quite a few people were getting knocked back. That's the most drunken I've seen in a while. That was quite something.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Right, so let's go all in. Let's start with our Celtic greatest all-time 11. So I asked you to provide me with your greatest all-time 11 and a formation, a system which you would like to transpose onto your players. Now, you went for quite an attacking formation of a 2-3-5, which harks back to the old kind of like early days of football, doesn't it? Really,
absolutely.
I suspect that's because you wanted to get all those great forward players in, rather than any kind of differentiation between enjoying defending over attacking. There's more to like with attacking players than defensive players, isn't there? Really. So it's a very personal choice. So do you want us to run us through it? Who's your sticks man? Who's the boy who's guarding the Celtic goal in this team?
The goalie in this kind of fantasy team of mine is Artur Boric, who's a bit of a folk hero amongst the Celtic support. The thing that stands out most for me about Boric is that for the first time in probably 20 or 30 years, it felt like we had a goalkeeper that you could have some real confidence in. He was so strong, so strong-minded, great shot stopper, great with penalties as well. And I mean, we'd had decent keepers, 80s into the 90s, but it was for a long time, the defence was called the sieve by the support, we had some poor defenders along the way. But the goalkeeper was always just seemed to be a bit of an issue, Martin O'Neill's era, when we came strong again for the first time in a long time, that was seemed to be a bit of a weakness, not really having an outstanding goalie with Magnus Hedman for a while, Rob Douglas. But Artur Boric just seemed to stand apart, fearless, and particularly good at confronting the opposition, seemed to be a bit of a head case, in all honesty, And I think certainly towards maybe it was with us about 5 years, the last season, he got an interesting tattoo, and things are happening in his personal life that hadn't happened before. So he seemed to be going a bit off the rails, and things were getting interesting there as well. So he would be confronting opposition players. He would be fighting guys like Aidan McGeady in the dressing room. It's like he really didn't care. I think for Gordon Strachan, it was a big issue trying to keep Boric happy, and trying to keep him sane as well. But magnificent athlete, he was just, it was, on the side, it was great. It just felt for the first time in years we didn't have to worry about a goalkeeper. And that, surprisingly, for a club like Celtic, that was really quite new,
I think what it does, it points to the fact that most Celtic teams that you can remember, the good Celtic teams, have been based around attacking, so they've never had to really rely on a keeper of note, because they've always outscored. Always had more of the possession, so it's never been it's never been a kind of fundamental for the team. So, but when Gordon came along and signed Arthur, it was a transitional period where they're coming out of that black hole, really, wasn't it, into a new era. So he wanted to start with from the back line, and he was truly a fantastic keeper, as you say. Self-belief incredible to the point of arrogance, really, sometimes. Wasn't it?
Absolutely, and then went on, and that always helps, I think, cement a player's reputation to be what they do next. He was very good at an international level for Poland, went to Italy, then went to England, you know, and we'll see with some of the other players that often it does feel a bit of vindication for Scottish fans if the players go on and do well in England, because the game up here often, you know, suffers from negative feedback from down south. Such a capable keeper. And like I say, confidence. He just gave us confidence as fans. Defence seemed strong. He once scored. He scored in a penalty kick decider. You know, and like saying a lot of people would have kind of backed away from that. You know, but he was always up there, always involved in all sorts of situations. But I think to the penalty save against Man United when we beat them in the Champions League qualifier, I think it was. He was just at the heart of a great team, and we won with him in goals. We won the league title 3 years in a row. And that was the first time Celtic had done that since the 70s, you know? Since
2006, 2007, 2008. That's right,
So that was a good achievement under Gordon Strachan, you know, that no other Celtic manager in intervening years had managed 3 in a row. We managed to beat it since then, but again, it was a good historic kind of breakthrough moment, and having a keeper that you could rely on, you know, and brilliant, you know, what a change.
Yeah. So moving forward into your 2-man defence. With Arthur in goal, you probably didn't really need a defence. You could have gone 10 up front, really, but you've gone for some semblance of defensive play. So that's So let's start with a club legend, basically, isn't he? He's great player, great man, and who is it? I'll let you. Obviously, it's your show, so I'll let you kind of go with that.
Well, at left back, we've got Tommy Gemmell. One of the difficulties as a Celtic fan when you're talking about your favourite 11, it's hard, you know, not to stick with the Lisbon Lions. You know, everybody's favourite team, historic, incredible 11, but with the formation that I've gone for, which is, as you said, it's all about attacking football. Celtic came to the game a little bit later than most other Scottish clubs, and the passing game had already been established in Scotland by that point in time, and Celtic's early success was rooted in the fact that they took it on a stage, you know, and the passing quality of the players in the early years was quite exceptional, and the emphasis was always on attack. So this, over time, as the fans call it, the Celtic way. That's what the Lisbon Lions were famous for as well. And it was so it's really just about scoring more goals than you're going to concede, and we don't care if we do concede as long as we score more. And this early formation, I'm just fascinated with it. The idea of having a front line of 5 is incredible. But that was the common formation for years, you know, before Herbert Chapman, the WM formation. And I think so. This is when Celtic established the Celtic way, you know, of attacking football. So 2 fullbacks, but both of them, Tommy Gemmell, renowned for going forward, you know, renowned for scoring in 2 separate European Cup finals.
Yeah, I think Paulie's goal scoring record, he was like 1 every 5 games, something like that. For a defender, it's absolutely, it's kind of unthinkable in the modern era, isn't it? He was very much that attacking fullback, and it wasn't just the goals; it was the what's commonly be known as assists.
As I know now.
He got play moving as well, didn't he? He was a very industrious and very attacking fullback.
I mean, an absolutely fearsome tackler, ridiculous tackler at times, you know. And I did a book on the career of Johnny Doyle, who went from Ayr United to Celtic in the 70s. And at Ayr United, Johnny was up against Tommy Gemmell a couple of times. At this point, Tommy's in his early 30s. Absolutely brutal, you know. It was a colleague that broke Johnny Doyle's leg, but Ayr United against Dundee games in those days, you know, unbelievable. And Tommy Gemmell went on to manage Dundee, so he kind of really stamped his way onto that team as well, you know.
They were a tough outfit,
unbelievable. He was a tremendous character. So again, pushing forward more than he should have done, you know. He won his goal in Lisbon. He actually shouldn't have been that far forward because the other fullback, Jim Craig, was up you know, so he should have been back. But in actual fact, it was the cutback across from Jingcraig. But Gemmell's goals, so many goals, strikes from outside the box, you know. He had the nickname the Big Shot, ferocious shot on him as well. And an incredible record. I think something like 35 penalties he took for Celtic, and he only missed 3.
Right.
He just went for power, you know.
Ratio, isn't it? Really?
Unbelievable. So again, you know, he's an attacking fullback. It'd be interesting to see how he'd be accommodated today. But brilliant engine on him as well, you know, a tremendous character.
Yeah. And then next to him, you've got another club legend who his goals were about as rare as I'm trying to think of an analogy without using a swear word, but something that unicorns do after they've eaten. His goals were as rare as that.
Oh, absolutely. I think Danny McQuade, I think he only scored about 3 or 4 goals in like a near 20-year career. You know what I mean? It's extraordinary. It was Danny's shot in the 1980 Scottish Cup final against Rangers, which led to the Hampden riot. Danny hit it. It was well off target. And George
got a little
redirected it. But Danny's, for guys my age, late 50s, early 50s, he's a folk hero. You know, he's absolutely beloved. One of the Quality Street gangs, this incredible group of reserve players that Celtic had coming through after the Lions. Kenny Dalglish, Lou Macari, Davy Hay, George Conley. George Conley just about made this team as well. Danny was the only one that stayed, you know. So that's obviously quite significant in itself. But he was the captain when I started watching Celtic. So 10, 11, 12 years on. By this point in time, he'd already... incredible number of mishaps. He'd overcome diabetes, some horrific injuries as well, including a broken skull in one game. Missed the World Cup in Argentina when he was probably at the absolute height of his career, you know. So that was a real tragedy. But an incredible tackler. His slide tackles were sensational, you know. I've never seen anyone time tackles as well as he could. And of course, he was obviously a bit on when I was getting to see him live in the flesh, but he would still be bobbing up and down the wings. But he had the positional sense, you know, when to go and when not. And his crossing was superb as well. So fortunately, we didn't have to rely on Danny for too many goals.
No, that's absolutely right. And also, it's the story that you helped me with, because I'm presently writing a book, but you sent me the piece about his he's almost no, he did. He had to shave his beard off, didn't he? What's the story behind that?
It was incredible. Celtic's trip to Albania in 1979. This is just the stories that come from are unbelievable. Celtic and the SFA, they just didn't know what they were getting into. I mean, even maybe 3-4 days before, the SFA weren't sure if the game was going ahead. The Albanian FA were refusing to communicate with them. There had been all sorts of issues about visas. So when the Albanians did communicate, it was basically saying you can bring 13 people and no more. And then they wouldn't allow any journalists in. And then the journalists had to go to the Albanian embassy in London and apply in person for visas. So it was becoming quite a big tabloid story here. And they didn't really know what they were getting into. But when Ajax had played in Albania about 4 or 5 years before, the story then was they were told they would have to cut off their moustaches or their beards or any long hair. And of course, Danny McQuade at this point in 1979 had this famous full dark beard, you know. That's why one of his nicknames is Barabbas from the Bible. And, so he was... The story being, that's it, you know, he'll need to get his beard shaved. Davy Province, Johnny Doyle's curly perms, he'll probably have to come off as well. Danny played up to it. There was press photos of his wife pretending to shave off his beard as well. But he emerged unscathed. It was just one of those things when they turn up in Tirana, nobody from the Albanian authorities says anything, through they go, you know. So the beard survived, fortunately.
Great. It's a magnificent story, isn't it? It's yeah, and thank you again for sending me all that stuff. And
No problem.
it's going to be component part of the book, that little story with some of the photos. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah.
But moving on to the next player in your line, we're moving into midfield now, aren't we?
Yeah. So midfield, it's a 3 in midfield essentially. So this is where it probably gets the most defensive. So I've gone for a kind of midfield fulcrum who's a demanding figure, commanding figure. An early Celtic captain from over 100 years ago, Sonny Jim Young, who was this 19, 20-year-old we signed from Bristol Rovers. We actually went to sign another Scottish player down from Bristol Rovers, and he recommended one of his teammates from Kilmarnock. So the former Celtic player Tom Dunbar decided to offer him a contract as well. So they both came back up the road. But Sonny Jim Young proved an unbelievable servant. So he was in the midfield 3, the Celtic team that won 6 in a row. So it was a new record at that time, 1904 to 1910. He wasn't the captain, but even from the age of 21, 22, on match reports feature him shouting at his teammates, shouting at opponents. So all the way through his Celtic career, it was marked by these shouts, with just stuff like, stand up Celtic, but this commanding figure, fearless as well. And over time, he took over from Jim Hay as captain, and after a couple of years of relatively little success, they then did 4 in a row, 1916 to 1920, from 1914 to 18, I think it was. So Sonny Jim Young was the captain of that team, and his teams were the first Scottish team to do a double, League and Cup double, and then they did it another 2 more times. The first Celtic team to win all 4 major trophies available in Scotland at one time as well. And at the heart of it was this massive Ayrshireman who could play football. So he wasn't just a hatchet man, although he definitely was capable of that.
He was a bit of a link man as well, wasn't he?
He could play. Yeah, he could deliver some good crosses, but more importantly, into the inside and the outside forwards, So he was a proper link man as well. But he was an enforcer. He was a protector. There was one game against Partick Thistle where Thistle striker hammered a Celtic player, and that was it. He was off injured. So, of course, at that time, no substitutes. Celtic were down to 10 men. It was Sonny Jim who exacted revenge on a guy who was, they reckon, maybe 7 or 8 inches smaller than him. That he got sent off for the challenge. He got banned from a month for the challenge. The newspapers were outraged that he targeted this tiny wee figure. But as I said, he'd already put a Celtic player off the pitch. So that was Sonny Jim's mentality, And the name was just... the name was really just ironic because he was famous for being this kind of unsmiling, hard-faced character, But there was a breakfast cereal around at the time called Force. And on the radio, their adverts were all about this character called Sonny Jim. So the Celtic fans took it from that and started singing a song about their Sonny Jim, But brilliant, commanding character, tremendous captain, So I'm thinking that's what I want in the heart of my team. Very little was going to get past him, and the 2 fullbacks as well, ideally.
So, who are we looking at on the left-hand side of your midfield troika?
Left-hand side, I've gone for my all-time favourite, Paul McStay, who is a true icon, for Celtic fans who watched him through the 80s and the 90s. And interestingly, a really popular character to this day amongst younger fans who would never have seen him. The best natural Scottish player that I've ever seen, glided along the football pitch. He broke through when he was 17, but McStay was already famous because he played in the schoolboy international against England that was live on TV, and I remember watching it.
Nice, yeah.
Unbelievable. Scotland won 5-4. Paul McStay got 2 goals. He was the captain. He then went on and captained the Scotland under-18 team to the only ever international tournament that Scotland have won, which was the UEFA under-18s, I think. That would have been about 81, I think.
It was just
80,
before
81.
the '82 World Cup, wasn't it? Yeah,
I think it was,
I
yeah.
watched the documentary on a BT. It's a
Pat
great
Nevins.
documentary.
Yeah. All about Pat Nevin trying to get TV footage of the final in Sweden.
That's the one.
Yeah, it was great. It was really entertaining, and Paul was taking part on it on video from Australia, where he now lives. So everybody knew about Paul McStay before he even became a Celtic first team player. And then for about 5 or 6 years, he just stepped right into the first team, and he never left. He was so good as a teenager that he never left. He was in Celtic first team before his big brother Willie. Both of them, we already had two famous McStays play for Celtic, both Celtic captains as well, back in the roughly the same time as Sonny Jim. Willie McStay came in same time as Sonny Jim, and then his brother came in after that, became Celtic manager after Willie Maley. So this was already a famous Celtic family, But despite that, the outstanding thing about Paul McStay was his ability. He's famous as much for his goals against Rangers for a pass. One pass in a game against Rangers at Celtic Park, where he reverses and he throws it down the right wing for Chris Morris straight in, and I think it's McAvenny that scores the goal. But incredible. And I always remember my pal Davey saying to me that during the early 90s, when watching Celtic was just utter sufferance, he said the only thing that keeps me going is watching McStay. And then he has the personal tragedy when it looks as though we're about to win our first trophy in 5 years. He misses the decisive penalty. He's the captain at this time, but he gets over that. We get to the Scottish Cup final the same season, and we managed to win that one. And then so he has that moment of glory. Celtic finally starting to challenge Rangers again under Tommy Burns the next 2 seasons, but McStay gets injured against Raith Rovers, incidentally enough, in Kirkcaldy. He'd already been carrying a few injuries in that season. That was him finished. And within weeks, we lost in the semi-final to Falkirk, and we couldn't catch Rangers. So Rangers did 9 in a row, and McStay's career was over, So for me, I'm fascinated with the McStay story because it's all about me growing up, seeing Celtic for the first time, but it's also about this amazing number of highs and lows, My first final 85, McStay's absolute moment of greatness is the centenary season. We did the double. We hadn't done the double in a long time, and he was just magnificent. And everybody says so, because he won both the players and the journalists' Player of the Year award. Magnificent servant for Scotland, and I think that gets overlooked because even when he's in his early mid-30s and he's picking up injuries all the time, he still turns out for Scotland when lots of other Scotland players have stopped doing that. He keeps going, and right up until the point where his career finishes, he'd still been playing for Scotland in the months before that. He was still turning out for his country. So yeah, an absolute hero, but what a player. And just perfect.
I mean, his passing was sublime, wasn't it, Paul? It was absolutely sublime. My dad, he used to, because we used to go and see him from time to time because we lived down here, he lived up there, and he initially when he said, "Oh, you've got to see this boy McStay. He's fantastic. He's absolutely fantastic." And he was. There's no doubt in that. So an absolute fantastic component of your team there, mate. So who's going to play on that other side of midfield? The opposite side of Sonny Jim.
Yeah, well, in stark contrast to the personality of Paul McStay, we've got Bertie Auld, an absolute character, one of the biggest characters in Celtic's history, in Scottish football as well. Bertie's only been dead a couple of years, but even in his latter years, he would regularly, sport would still see him at events. One of the funniest guys, tremendous guy. In fact, I've been to see, there's a play about Bertie. I've seen it twice now. Just went to Vegas last week for the convention, and it's we've got a stand-up comedian who plays the role of Bertie in it. The play's called Bend It Like Bertie, and it's brilliant because it's basically all of Bertie's patter in one hour show. All the things that happen to him, but it's he's such a funny guy. The play captures his personality superbly. But that's not why I picked him. I've picked him because he was hard as nails. Bertie Auld could be brutal. When Celtic faced off Leeds in the European Cup semi-final, 1970, that Leeds team, Celtic beat them physically,
Yeah.
And one of these, that Tommy Gemmell we mentioned earlier, but Bertie Auld could absolutely mix it. He could be brutal. He was the professional's professional. He knew all the dirty tactics that were needed as well, and an absolute born winner, So I'm thinking that's who I've got to get Bertie in there. A lot of the Lions haven't made it, but for me, Bertie Auld, just everything. And I think probably one of the reasons he was successful is because he left Celtic, not through his own choice, but again, because he was a somewhat controversial player at times, but a winner, and prepared to do anything to win. The Celtic chairman at the time, Bob Kelly, wasn't particularly averse to characters like that. So he got punted down to Birmingham City.
Yeah.
And I think he was there 3 years, and again up against the best of English football at that time. And he got even better. Jock Stein, basically, when Jock Stein decided to take over the Celtic manager, he made it clear to Bob Kelly, Bertie has to come back. So that was done even before Jock Stein was in place, And I think to a large extent, Bertie was Jock Stein's brain on the pitch, because there's a couple of great stories about how Bob Kelly would come in and before games, and he would say to the players, you want to uphold the Celtic traditions of fair play, attacking play, yes, but fairness at all costs, absolute dignity. And then when he would leave, Jock Stein would say, right, with that, and it would be Bertie Auld. It would be like, you get in there, nail him in the first minute. Solid, quite a small player, absolutely solid as well, So a true winner was Bertie.
Yeah, well, Birmingham City. I'm a Birmingham City fan, and Birmingham City fans will attest to Bertie's kind of contribution there. He's quite a he's a bit of a legend down at St Andrews too, because he helped them to win the League Cup in 1962-63 as well. Right, okay. So he was part of that team that did Villa. So he's much loved amongst the much loved amongst the Birmingham City contingent there, mate.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the 5-man attack.
Oh wow!
We'll go back to the emissions at the end, and we'll have a brief talk. We'll talk about who's in first. Okay, so I'll let you go through in the order that you please. Your 5 attacking components of this Celtic 11.
So often when it comes to best 11s, and a lot of clubs now have their players. So I'm trying to say they've got the Hall of Fame. Most clubs have that now. Big commercial thing now. Celtic first did it about 2000, 2001, and in Celtic's greatest ever 11, as voted by the fans, it was 8 Lisbon Lions and 3 others, but there was nobody from before the 1950s. And I always thought that's a real omission. The problem is, of course, we haven't seen these guys play, and often there's no film footage of them either. But Jimmy McGrory is the greatest striker ever in Celtic history. And the statistics prove that to be the case, And I think there's just no arguing. It has to be McGrory, despite all the many incredible international class strikers that we've had right from the get-go. So Sandy McMahon in the earliest days, even Jimmy Quinn. But McGrory's scoring was phenomenal. He's still in the Guinness Book of Records. He's still, I think, in the top 10 in terms of world football.
Goal scorers in there.
It's the statistics from what I remember. It's like 550 goals in 547 games for his entire career. So he was farmed out to Clydebank, scored 13 goals there. That includes the international goals, but I think he only played 8 times for Scotland, and then the other kind of minor cups, But whatever way you look at it, if it's just league appearances and Scottish Cup appearances, he still scores more than a goal a game. And what's incredible about that is that, so he was a Celtic player for, I think, 18 years. In that time, he only wins 3 league titles. So this wasn't a great Celtic team that he was in.
Yeah.
He's up against Hughie Gallagher, famously of Airdrie, Newcastle United, Chelsea, for the strikers position at international level. More often than not, the selectors pick Hughie rather than Jimmy McGrory. But McGrory's phenomenal goal scoring is what sets him apart from everybody else, and that's something I'm thinking. Yeah, we need to remember that. So one game against Dunfermline, he scores 8 goals. 8 goals himself in a league game. It wasn't a friendly, it was a proper league game. And at half-time, I think he'd scored 5, and his teammates were aware. Steve Bloomer held the record, the British record at that time, which I think was 7 goals in one first-class game. And so they were all out. They were just all out, giving him the ball at every opportunity. And they managed to break it. He got the 8th goal. But in that season, when he got the 8 against Dunfermline, he scored 72 goals. It's just ridiculous. And as I say, this was not a Celtic team that was winning the leagues and cups regularly, I think he won the cup maybe 4 or 5 times over his Celtic career. So it was because he's only 5'7" or 5'8", built like Henrik Larsson, and that he wasn't particularly tall, but they say he built like shoulders like a Clydeside horse, an absolute physical specimen that they just couldn't stop him from getting his head to the ball. So his nicknames included the Human Torpedo, the Golden Crust, the Mermaid, and he was just a phenomenon of his age, and grew up in the Celtic area in Glasgow. Only ever played for Celtic other than the time at Clydebank at the very start of his career. A goal scoring phenomenon. So he would score with minimal service. So I'm thinking you just couldn't ignore Jimmy McGrory. There's great players, but he had it all.
Imagine that, Paul, in those blood and thunder times where people were kind of throwing in tackles and to still score that ratio of goals when you've got so many obstacles in your way. It's quite phenomenal, isn't it? Yeah.
Completely different game. And of course, at that time, you were allowed to ram the goalie. And McGrory was famous for that as well, with those famous shoulders of his, And he had a lot of injuries, always came back, always kept going. Unbelievable. So what do you need up front? You need a goal scorer. And Celtic have never had a better goal scorer than Jimmy McGrory.
That's a great choice, mate. It's a great choice. So let's crack on. Who is the next Celtic great in your 5 attacking pronged? Well, it's not even a 5-pronged attack.
Yes. So McGrory centre, but probably alongside him, so it might be a 2-pronged attack in essence. Henrik Larsson. Just the best thing I think I can say about Henrik Larsson, there's a comedy sketch show up in Scotland for years, and they did one where a Rangers fan sitting in his living room listening to the Celtic Rangers game on the radio, and Larsson scores again against Rangers. So in anger, picks up the radio, smashes it against the wall and sits down. And then you hear the radio commentator saying, and unbelievably, Larsson has managed to put the radio back together again, and Larsson's on the attack and he scored again. And that's what it was like. There was nothing that Henrik Larsson couldn't do. And I mean, the biggest games, the cup finals, the deciders, the UEFA Cup final in Seville, 2 goals, 2-headed goals that day. Unbelievable player. I mean, just unbelievable. And so he's 53 goals in one season, Got his 50th goal at Ibrox, where he was almost barely a foot off the line, and he somehow still managed to hit it in at the tightest of angles for his 50th goal of the season. I don't think we'd really seen anybody quite like him before, Guys older than me would say Dalglish, for Celtic, because Dalglish was Celtic first team player for a good 5-6 years before he left for Liverpool. But yeah, Henrik Larsson, unbelievable. Just scored and scored again. And mentioned at the start as well, Phil, if you're looking for vindication, Scottish game gets trashed a lot. This guy goes to Barcelona, does really well at Barcelona. Arsenal players say he's the guy that really turned the Champions League final against them. Comes on 2 assists, Barcelona win it, and then goes back to Sweden. But then Alex Ferguson goes and gets him and takes him to Man United, and he wins the league at Man United, which comes as no surprise to us because his work rate was phenomenal. He could shoot from anywhere. He was a brilliant header of the ball as well, and there was just this almost miraculous quality to Henrik Larsson. And yeah, I've never seen anyone up close, as often as him, who could do the things that he could do. He could turn games on his own. Chris Sutton's an interesting guy, to come up to Scotland from England, and quite a rambunctious character as well. But he talks about Larsson in quite hallowed terms, I don't think Sutton's got a lot of time for a lot of his fellow professionals.
No.
He talks about Larsson the way we talk about Larsson in awe. So
he was Wim Janssen's great gift to the club. I know he broke that 9-year sequence as well, but he was probably the ultimate gift that he brought to Celtic, wasn't he?
Without a doubt. And under Martin O'Neill, we then finally, after years, become a bit of a force in Europe again. We then get into the Champions League group stages proper. We make all the way to UEFA Cup final. But once again, we're going to places like Barcelona, and we're putting on a show. We're holding these teams off. And the UEFA Cup run, he was just magnificent all the way through. He got us the goal in the semi-final when it looked like we might be done and dusted. The games against Blackburn, the away game, particularly against Blackburn, brilliant. So, probably the best I've seen in a Celtic jersey. One of the best I've seen, live. He could do anything.
Massive big game player.
Unbelievable.
So moving on, we'll go beyond Henrik, and who is our next?
So McGrory, Henrik, just inside. I'm saying in the inside left position, so I'm going over back to this side again. Lubomir Moravcik. Just like Henrik was a gift from Wim Jansen, Dr. Joe Venglos didn't have a great time at Celtic, but he brought a Slovak compatriot who was unbelievable. Two-footed, so skillful. And he would just shoot on sight from outside the box, whereas most people just think, I'll get closer, just go, bang, bang, bang. Unbelievable dead ball specialist as well. And he was 33 when he joined us. And so many Celtic fans have said if only we'd got him 5 years before, the damage he could have done would have been phenomenal. But we had him when he helped, again, as part of O'Neill's team, establish us again in Europe, when we overcome Ajax to qualify for the Champions League proper. Lubo's celebration is a kind of iconic photo for Celtic fans, because he would have been about 36 by then, I think, but he helped get us there into the promised land of Champions League group football. But, oh, wow, he couldn't do anything. He once famously controlled a high ball with his bum in front of the main stand at Celtic, but against Hearts, the Hearts defender wasn't marking him closely, was giving him plenty of space. So high ball comes over. How does it? He just decides to control it with his right bum. He gets it and then whips it across. And from across, we got a corner, and then we scored from the corner.
That's fantastic, but he's that template of the kind of the kind of player that I talk about this in a few other podcasts. Too many midfields are built around that that kind of solidity, and Flair is overlooked. But he was like that classic Central European kind of playmaker, goal scorer. Who got the team moving, really, wasn't he?
Absolutely,
he was that kind of player.
Absolutely. He scored 4 iconic goals against Rangers, home and away. It wasn't his debut, but I think it was only his second or third game in. This is a Rangers team that we were struggling to get close to, and he scores 1 goal, shot from distance, unbelievable. He scores a header in the second half. He looks bemused by the huge reaction. But better than that is that season when Larsson scored his 50th goal at Ibrox. Moravcik scored 2 goals that day against Rangers, which were almost identical. And just like you were saying there, Phil, he just filled the gaps that other Scottish players just didn't seem to be aware of. He would get the ball, he would turn, he would find the space, and he would just take guys on. And he would leave them for dead. So one great move that he takes the defender on, he pulls the ball back, he's lost them, he then just clips it round the goalkeeper in front of 9,000 Celtic fans going absolutely ballistic, So for his close skill, he was exceptional. Truly loved, by the Celtic fans as well.
Great, mate. Great. So who is that? I think is that 4. That's 4 we've covered, isn't it? Yeah. So we've got one more, haven't we?
We've got
final forward.
So we've got McQuade. We've got our
we've got 2
outsiders.
More.
We've got our 2 outsiders. So on the left, and this is a bit of kind of Celtic heresy. I've not picked Jimmy Johnson. Main reason for that is because Jimmy Johnson humiliated my dad in a school's football game.
Did they? Oh.
There's a famous
misses out because he showed your dad up. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a whole generation he did that to. Famous photo of him with his medals from school football. There's about 70 of them. Yeah. My dad, reserve goalkeeper for his school, primary school, didn't have his boots with him. The goalie, they were 4 down at half time against Jimmy's team from View Park. The goalie went sick. So my dad, as reserve goalie, had to step in his shoes, and then they lost 3 more goals against Jimmy's team. So at least he can say he played against them, But Jimmy's always there, and deservedly so. However, I think the template for Jinky Johnson is Patsy Gallagher. And if more of us had seen Patsy Gallagher, we would be tipping it more towards Patsy. Hard to say. But Patsy Gallagher was a one-off, and for decades after, people were talking about his goals, his runs, his skill. Tiny wee player, the archetypal Celtic player, pre-Jinky, tiny wee player that they couldn't get the ball off, but he scored loads of goals. He set up loads of goals and he scored loads of goals. But his goal in the 1925 Scottish Cup final is what really tells the Patsy Gallagher story. Facing a packed Dundee defence, way outside the box, he comes in. There's no footage of this, unfortunately. Oh. He beats, we think, 4, potentially 5 defenders till he's been blocked on just in front of the line by the goalkeeper and another defender. The ball between his legs, he jumps over the goalkeeper in a somersault, lands in the back of the net, tied up in the net. So there's a few cartoons with him tied up in the net, with Jimmy McGraw and his teammates trying to untie him and pull him back out. That was the first goal. Dundee were winning. We won 2-1. McGrory got the second. So this phenomenal goal, of which there's only cartoons and diagrams, and some of the match reports don't even describe how he scored. So it's kind of shaded a little bit in mystery as well. But the people who were there, like the Celtic chairman Bob Kelly, I mentioned earlier, Patsy was his favourite. He would always tell people about Patsy. Even Charlie Tully, who came later as well, he would be telling him, "You're good, but Patsy's better." So yeah, just to freshen things up, I'm saying we'll pick Patsy instead of Jinky just this one time. And at the Celtic women won the Scottish Cup this year, I think for the first time. And Patsy Gallagher's great granddaughter was one of the Celtic players.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, incredible.
Amazing circle, isn't it? History always comes back to repeat, doesn't it? It's one of the perennial truths, isn't it? That it always comes back to revisit. Yeah.
It's one of the real interesting things for me, with women's football, is the fact that there's a lot of players that I'm familiar with whose daughters and maybe even granddaughters are names that you're seeing, playing at Celtic and other clubs as well. So this woman is Kevin Gallagher's cousin or niece, so different sons of Patsy who both became footballers, one for Dundee, one for Celtic. So she's from the Dundee wing of the Gallagher family.
Okay.
Incredible.
Okay, so moving on, we've got our four. Patsy Gallagher's in there. Yeah, one of the great unseen goals of our time, of all
Yeah,
time.
unfortunately.
His nickname was the Mighty Atom, wasn't it? Because of his stature
Yeah,
and his
yeah. They
But
might add
we'll
a
move
little
on
bit of
to
grit.
our fifth choice, which is possibly the most contentious of them all. But
Definitely.
talk us through it, Paul. You give us some kind of context about this player.
This is a guy who I'd heard about. I'd heard other Celtic fans talk about, and I just kind of really didn't believe it, you know. And it's simply because I've seen him do it live on a number of occasions. I thought, you know what, there's definitely been better Celtic players than him, but he was someone who, on his day, was just incredible. And he had magnificent skill and drive, and he could score. And we probably got him a bit late. He probably wasn't as good as he could have been, but he was just wonderful. When he had the ball and he drove forward, he was just incredible. Paddy McCourt. And many people will say, well, Paddy McCourt's really a lower league player, you know. But in his short time at Celtic, I think he was only with us 2, maybe 3 seasons. He scored amazing goals. I saw him score 2 goals against Falkirk one night, and I think in each of them he beat at least 3 or 4 players both times. If you go online, you'll see goals that he scored against St Mirren. He beat 5, I think. Amazing goal against Inverness. And you know, to see someone take on opponents and just go for it, and he would generally right-footed player play on the left side and cut in that way, you know. But he would always get the shot off. And sometimes it would just be him and the keeper, and he would just dink the keeper. And it's just, I've heard about players before him in England, particularly, you know, who just had that incredible, almost George Best-like effect, you know, and that he didn't look particularly fit at times, certainly wasn't properly professionally fit. It's interesting in terms of whether Gordon Strachan wanted Paddy McCourt at Celtic. I think there's a few question marks around that and whether it was basically possibly imposed upon him. But for those moments, Paddy McCourt was absolutely electric. And he did it a few times at international football level for Northern Ireland as well. Scored a number of, a few great goals for them too. But just to see someone slalom past defenders and just rely on that almost innate ability to move and to shimmy and to jink and to just keep going. I've never seen anybody do it in the flesh to that extent before. So it's ridiculous that he's there before Charlie Tully. But again, you know, if it's your team, you get final say. And I just think, we'll have McCourt on for maybe the first half hour. But Tully was almost certainly more skillful, better international record. Tully could score the old goal Olympicos from the corner kicks as well. But both of them, I think, enjoyed a fag. Certainly Tully used to smoke halfway through training at Celtic Park. And as I say, Paddy McCourt, you know, could have been more professional and would probably have got further as well. But again, for him, Celtic was his club, so fulfilled a dream. But watching him score those goals is just a genuine pleasurable memory for me, you know. So just something a bit different with Paddy McCourt.
Oh, amazing, mate. So, a team that's beset with a few surprises there. I was looking at a few of the omissions that I
Yes.
And obviously, you're looking at the Lions. You got Bobby Lennox and Billy McNeil. You got Jimmy Johnson. There's also players that I like Davy Provan. He was a fantastic footballer, great creative, creative player. And George McCluskey, chiefly for that goal in 1980, really. And that was his season, wasn't it? Because he came and he scored bags of goals that season. I think.
Absolutely.
In the
great
league.
goal scorer, George McCluskey.
Yeah, and then you got Shunsuke Nakamura as well, who was that engine in midfield. He was great with the dead ball as well. Good creator of
free kicks.
Yeah.
So we were struggling to win the league one year. He got the free kick at Kilmarnock that sealed it for us. Scored 2 free kicks against Man United in the Champions League.
Yeah. Yeah. So few omissions, but a great 11 there, and some real food for thought for people who would. Some people would just list the Lisbon Lions, wouldn't they? And that would be it. Then you wouldn't kind of gravitate from that. But there's some really good alternatives there, and I've thoroughly enjoyed talking through that with you. But now we're going to head into darker territory. I've been doing this piece with every kind, with the first three. This is the third one, but the first two podcasts, and I've asked big fans of football teams to list their 3 worst games ever in their experience of a fan of that team. Now you've given me 3 real stinkers, haven't you? Would you like to start with the first one? Talk me through it, the historical context, what happened, what it meant. Take it away, Paul.
So the first one we'll go for is 1994, Celtic's crisis era. We've got Lou McQuade in as manager. We can't compete financially with Rangers. So this season, Rangers spend £5 million on Duncan Ferguson and Gordon Durie. We sell our top goal scorer, Andy Payton. We swap him for Wayne Biggins and £100,000. Wayne Biggins is a name that just sends shivers down the backs of Celtic fans, because and it's a bit unfair, but he really has come to kind of symbolise that era. He played 10 first-team games for Celtic, never scored, never managed to go.
He was over punching when he was handed that contract, wasn't he? By a great extent.
Absolutely.
He played for Shrewsbury and Stoke, didn't he? He was,
and that's how McQuade knew him from his time at Stoke. I think Wayne Biggins had scored a few goals in his time, but he was now 33. This is who we were pinning our hopes on. So in this nightmare game at Celtic Park, so the New Year's Day fixture since the 1890s, it's been the big game in Scottish football, Celtic against Rangers. And we had, under McQuade, we'd managed to kind of make up a bit of ground, so we were still close to Rangers in the league. And of course, as always with football fans, you just see on that little bit of hope, you're thinking, something happens here, we could actually catch up with this financial monster and overtake them. Everything fell apart that day. And it fell apart from the very first minute when Mark Hateley scored for Rangers. And then in 3 minutes, we were 2 goals down. And it was just a nightmare scene unfolding. The atmosphere was awful. You just thought something bad's really going to happen here if this gets any worse, which it did in the 30th minute. Rangers scored again, went 3-0 up, and that's when things just went crazy. We had pitch invasions, we had people trying to attack the Celtic director's box, missiles thrown at them. I think Rangers goalkeeper was attacked. That might have been slightly later in the game when the 4th goal went in. Half-time, we're 3-0 down in a game that we needed to win to keep our league championship hopes alive. And it, after 3 or 4 years of incredibly bad football, a club run out of money, terribly mismanaged, it was all becoming apparent. It didn't look as though we were going to get rid of that particular board because they managed to fend off a couple of takeover bids by that point. It was sheer despair, and a manager known for running clubs to a shoestring budget, and it just all tore apart that day. We pulled one back first minute of the second half, and then I think Rangers got the 4th, and Nicholas made it 4-2 with about 10 minutes to go. Throughout the second half, there were various things happening on the field, fans invading. The Celtic directors had all sorts of things thrown at them. Famously, a Mars bar hit one on the head as well. Fortunately, nothing more serious than that. And that was the absolute depths of despair, because it blew apart any kind of comfort that you had that we were going to be capable of turning this around. And I think Rangers had already won, 4, 5 in a row by that point. And you're just thinking, this is never going to end for us now, And sure enough, off the back of that horrific 4-2 defeat, we then lose 2 more league games. We go to Motherwell in the first round of the Cup, end of January. Motherwell knock us out of the Cup. Celtic were praying for a replay in that game. A late goal. Biggins came on, I think, with 10 minutes to go. We needed a replay because the board needed another game at Celtic Park to bring in money, because things were that bad for us financially. We needed another 25,000-30,000 crowd to try and keep things going. It was unbelievable. But Motherwell knocked us out. Our season was over in January. We had nothing else to play for. European football was gone as well. So yeah, that being down 3-0 at half-time at home to Rangers, heaviest loss to them since the 1960s at home.
Yeah,
just incredible. The only good thing about it is, looking back, we can now see it as a bit of a turning point, because finally those fans who'd remained loyal to the old board, didn't want to cause disruption, finally they'd had enough. They snapped as well. So everything then turned in favour of Fergus McCann and the rebel group that were trying to take over. And within, what would that have been, 12 weeks, mid-March, they were in control at Celtic. McCann was in control, and the old family dynasties were out. So fortunately, things then began to change, But what a low point that was.
But a pivotal day in the club's history, wasn't it? Really,
unbelievable. Not helped, Phil, by the fact that I had the worst toothache that I'd ever had, and was on my way to my pal's wedding in Ireland the next day as well.
Oh,
it was
so everything
in every sense. Even the alcohol wasn't helping.
That's terrible, mate. Terrible. Yeah, but really bad. That's bad. Moving on to another bad in the history of Celtic. So go on, mate. We'll get through this quick so we can put you out your misery. What's the next one?
So Scottish Cup final 1990, which is it's our last chance to win a trophy. It's our last chance to claim a place in Europe, because we've ended 5th in the league. We're up against Aberdeen. They're doing quite well. Billy McNeil's still the Celtic manager, his second stint around. We'd won the Cup the year before, but Rangers had won the league. They'd won the league again. So this was it. Everything depended upon this game. Roasting hot day at Hampden. For me, I had a lot invested, because that season I'd seen Celtic play more times than any other. I had got involved in running my supporters club in Edinburgh. So I'd been to places I'd never been before, away games. And it was great, but we were dreadful, was the reality. Or at that point, it was slowly becoming apparent how dreadful we were. Even though we had some great players, some great individuals like McStay, and I don't know if Collins was with us, but we still had Roy Aitken, I think. Packy Bonner in goals, so we still had what should have been the nucleus of a good team. Up against Aberdeen, it was, the teams were very evenly matched, as it turned out. And at the end of 90 minutes, 90 minutes in extra time, for the first time ever in a Scottish Cup final, the game was going to penalties. Never happened before. And I think my experience of penalties had been a little bit mixed even before this encounter. But so this day, you're just saying, we just want to win this, we'll stay in Europe, but at least we'll have something to show for this absolutely dreadful season. And I think we missed the first penalty. Darius Dovcek, the Pole, who might have been our captain at that point, missed the first one. But fortunately, Brian Grant, I think, missed for Aberdeen about the third or the fourth one. So that squared it up. We then go to 5-5. Everybody scores. Comes up with maybe the 8th penalty. Charlie Nicholas for Aberdeen. Now, everybody knows he's coming back to Celtic, that the deal's been done. So you're thinking, this is a huge pressure he's under.
Will he? Sure, he must.
And then you're thinking, well, if he misses it, he's going to get crucified, isn't he? So it's like, but he didn't miss. So let's say that would have been 8-8. It was unbelievable. It goes to, let me get this right, it goes to 8-8 on penalties. And then Anton Rogan steps up, and Theo Schneider saves it down to the corner. Really good save, actually. So Rogan, he's got pelters for this ever since, but it wasn't a bad penalty, Some of the other ones were poorer, but they still went in. So you're like, oh, here we go. And up steps another Brian, smashes it home. 9-8. If he'd missed, it was the two goalkeepers who were up next. I mean, it would have been mind blowing. So that's the only time I've ever cried at a football match, because
nice.
I was just utterly desolate, because I'd invested so much in that season, and thinking the team would turn it around eventually. We've got our iconic manager, Billy McNeil. We've got some great individual players. We're surely not that bad. And yeah, unbelievable. So after going through this nightmare penalty experience, we're the ones that end up losing. Aberdeen fans off to the right, can't believe it. They're having a massive celebration, and we just can't get out of Hampden quick enough, unfortunately.
The Herald called that Celtic performance stagnant. That's what they said about that. But it also featured a misfiring Dariusz Jakinovski, who had an atrocious game that day. Couldn't trap a bag of cement and just looked totally immobile and awful, which brings us to our worst game ever.
Oh, Dariusz Jakinovski. Oh, wow. Somebody commented on Twitter today, we thought we'd unearthed an absolute gem, but within about 7 months, it was like he just completely lost interest. And that Scottish Cup final performance kind of summed all that up. Whereas just back in previous November, UEFA Cup, second leg at home to Partizan Belgrade, Jakinovski was unbelievable. Scores 4 goals. 4 goals for Celtic in that one game. And we get knocked out on aggregate. We win 5-4, but it's not good enough, because we'd lost 2-1 in Belgrade. So it was 6-6 on aggregate, and we end up going out. But that doesn't even come close to telling the story, because it's one of the most vivid and incredible football games I've ever experienced. It was just unbelievable. And there was 48,000 that night at Celtic Park. So we'd got the away goal over in Belgrade. Mike Galloway had scored. So 2-1. Partizan were a good team. Yugoslavian football was definitely on the up. Scotland, I'd actually seen Scotland play Yugoslavia the previous October. And I think the Yugoslavs were already World Club Youth Champions round about that time, late 80s as well, So we knew that Partizan were a dangerous team with some very, very good players. So to get the away goal, we'd been poor in Europe throughout most of the 80s. To bring them back, thought, right, we're in with a chance here, I'd just come back from my first ever holiday in Paris, got the bus up from London to make this game. And it was all, you think this is all falling in really nicely, touch and go that I was going to make it, made it fine. Get in, meet up with my pals up the back of the Rangers end, as was at Celtic Park, and watch this game unfold. First thing, Partizan within a few minutes score. So they're into a 3-1 aggregate lead. Jakinovski scores, pulls one back. So half-time, we're trailing 3-2. The second half of football is like nothing I've ever seen since. Jakinovski scores pretty much straight away, and decent goals as well, scores straight away. 5 minutes, Partizan equalise. Jakinovski scores again. 5 minutes, Partizan equalise again, right? And then I think it's another 5, possibly 6 minutes later, Andy Walker scores. And we're thinking, oh, this might be any break the deadlock of goals here. So Andy Walker scores, and then maybe a 10-minute gap, Jakinovski scores his 4th. And for the first time in the 2 legs, we're ahead. And we've got 9 minutes left to defend this lead. 9 minutes. We've done all the hard work. Billy McNeil famously said afterwards, we climbed 3 mountains and threw ourselves off the top of each one. But despite that, we were finally in charge. And we only had 9 minutes to see the game out. And if you see what happens 2 minutes from the end, it's just inexplicable.
The winner is just the goal that wins it is just it's just horrible. The horrible moment.
It's amazing because the ball goes out to the left, and the Partizan player swings it right over the Celtic goalmouth, and to a teammate who then half volleys it back into the middle, where the striker, whose son ends up playing for Celtic about 10 years ago, Stephen Skippy, bullet header, straight past Bonner. There's a defender either side of Bonner. There was a defender over beside the guy who volleyed it back. There was defenders everywhere. None of them did anything. There's like so many chances to stop it, and you knew it was only like 2 minutes left. So that goal went in, and it had been a brilliant atmosphere because it built up all the way through the second half. Where we're going to get it back, where we're going to match them. We matched them, and then we overtook them, and then that's it. We just need to see out. This is brilliant. This is brilliant. And then when that goal went in, it was unbelievable. The silence. All you hear was a bit of noise down to the left in front of the main stand where their players ran towards their coach in the dugout. And it was just, people were shocked and stunned, and it was just incredible. And then it seemed within 10 seconds, the final whistle had gone, and that was it. We had absolutely blown it. And this just came to symbolise everything that came after for the next 5 years. It was extraordinary that we didn't win that game, and what a platform that would have been, to go forward in Europe. How can you score 4 goals and yet still end up on the losing side? It was just unbelievable. And of course, for Jakinovsky, that was it. He lost interest pretty quickly, and it turned into a bad move. Despite what should have been, we should be joking about Jakinovsky in terms of somebody getting into your favourite Celtic 11. He had all the talent in the world, and he was a brilliant finisher. And his finishes that night were top drawer as well, But wow, the atmosphere. Some people were clapping, as the players went off, and you had other people berate them for clapping. That nonsense, But I think most of the people were they just couldn't actually believe that Celtic hadn't won the game. But what an amazing experience, to see. The incredible thing is the passage of goals. We were never more than one ahead until we get to the very end, and then it's there on a platter, and we fail to take it, But so nine goals in that one game. Unbelievable. But
fantastic. One of the great European games of all time, probably. But sometimes they go your way, sometimes they don't. And that didn't. And as you say, opened a little Pandora's box of unpleasantness that rolled on for the next half a century, right? I don't know, half a decade.
Yeah. You're right, because we don't get Europe. That hadn't happened since the late 70s. We don't get into Europe, but then we keep not getting into Europe. And European football is a huge thing for the Celtic support, because it's the huge thing, and kind of a lot of guys plan their year around, where are we going to go? Well, now increasingly July, August, but where can we go? So to be deprived that was really quite bad for the support, and also to lose our kind of status as a good, well-known European team as well. We were in the gutter, and those kind of 3 games. So we're talking 89, 90, 94, 89 and 90. That's just really the start of the rot. It just got worse and worse, and then being 3-0 down at half-time to Rangers at home. That was it. And like I said, a wake-up call for those Celtic fans who weren't convinced that the board at that time were still acting in their best interests.
Mate, it's been fantastic talking to you, Paul. It's been the 11 was amazing, because it featured players that I had to research, because they were so far ingrained in this 135-year history. But what it does do for me, it gives me hope that 135 years time there'll be 2 other blokes talking about Celtic and talking about another great raft of players, and some of these ones from this era will be remembered. And it's all part of the legacy, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, no, definitely. My son, that was his first Scottish Cup final last Saturday. Beautiful summer's day. A good game. Inverness put up a decent challenge against us as well. But he got to experience that, aged 14. So you just think, hopefully he'll enjoy. We've got some wonderful players at the moment as well. Even Kyogo was in the fringes there, because he's an incredibly unique striker. And I think, he's going to go on and do a lot in football still. We're lucky. We're very lucky. And I think most Celtic fans appreciate we're a very successful club. We've dominated in the last 10, 20 years. And yeah, we but the kind of unique thing, I think, well, for me about Celtic is, yeah, we've always been successful, but when we have these moments of absolute comic tragedy, like we were talking about earlier, and there's been some in more recent times as well, games that I haven't managed to get tickets for. You know, I wasn't at the Raith Rovers Cup final in '94 as well, thankfully. But yeah, there's for a big team, we've had a lot of bad moments and a lot of big shocks along the way, you know. I was over at Paris to see Celtic score against Paris Saint-Germain, take the lead in the second minute. Unbelievable. We lost 8-1.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's been bad times, definitely, mate, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, mate, it's been a marvellous journey into Celtic's past, with one or two surprises along the way. So, where, just for those who haven't yet seen the Shamrock fanzine, where's it available for those who haven't subscribed, mate?
We've got a website, which I hope we've got here. Yeah, it's that is actually the old one. Hold on a second.
Sorry, I'm very, very sorry.
It's the website is the-shamrock.net. So that's where we've got a lot of the articles, the longer articles that don't make it into the fanzine. We've got them all on there, and various other bits of stuff as well, you know. Just it's just been a fascination for a long time, and I just keep finding more and more interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I've had a few good peeks at it over the last couple of months, and it is a fantastic read, guys. So get yourself on it, have a look. You'll find plenty of kind of unmined treasure on there. So get yourself over to it. So, guys, thank you, Paul. It's been a fantastic pleasure speaking to you, and we'll see you next time for more fantastic stories, past and present, on Football Geeks. Thank you, everybody.
Brilliant.